Welcome, I'm Stephen J. Garvey, founder, leader, National Citizens Alliance, NCA. We are Canada's true grassroots, uncontrolled, populist opposition, federal opposition. And we look forward to the upcoming federal election. We will be running candidates across the country. We are anti-globalist UN, pro-Canadian. And tonight we're going to be talking about Jordan Peterson and his connection to the globalist agenda that's being imposed on Canada and the rest of the world. And it's going to be a four-tiered presentation tonight. We're going to be looking at some professional commentary on Peterson to set the tone. Then I'm going to shift to the United Nations and look at his involvement with that globalist institution. Then I'm going to shift to his views on Canadian nationalism and Euro white Canadians. And then I'm going to look at his most recent book on the 12 Rules of Life. And, I should clarify this at the beginning. We have no issue whatsoever with Peterson's views on progressive gender identity. National Citizens Alliance supports complete rescindment of C-16. And we applaud Peterson's work to help shed light on that egregious control of how Canadians think and act, and attack on our traditional families with that utter nonsense of gender progressive theory. So we have no issue there. But what we have issue with is his other aspects of his work and the globalist agenda and the influence he's having on, it tends to be white male Canadians. So we're gonna address that tonight. This is just another layer of the globalist agenda. And I know we've been getting some criticism from some of the supporters of Peterson. We ask you to restrain your remarks, restrain your conclusions until the end of the presentation. Get all the facts from us, hear us out, then draw your own conclusion and share your feedback. That's the rational thing to do. Don't jump to conclusions right now. Hear us out. That's all we're asking. And we have no personal grudge against Peterson, but, his work, as far as we're concerned, outside of the gender theory, is pure globalism, and it's harming our country. And that's why we're speaking up against him and other globalists tonight. I'm going to get into this now. I have a couple of slides here. And this is, the first slide is of a professor of philosophy. And this lady is looking at critiquing Peterson, his work. And this is only the tail end of her conclusion, but she calls it the cult of Peterson continues to grow, quote. And then she goes on, he said his audience cannot handle any criticism whatsoever of Peterson and his work. And that's one of the tail signs of a cult. And then she goes on to say his audience is swallowing whole anything and everything he says with absolutely, quote, no critical filter whatsoever. This is very concerning. And then she says, in her opinion, he is consciously selling Christianity, so-called traditional conservatives, and especially hardline male sacrifice and gynocentrism. Gynocentrism is exclusive focus on women. And then the professor says he does this while pretending to fall under, quote, scientific atheism. And then she goes on to point out that his personality lectures have switched to sermon mode with his lectures on Christianity, while all the while pretending, quote, "I don't know if there is a God, but I act like there is one." And then she says one of his latest lectures was upholding male sacrifice and male disposability, male servitude. So that's one fairly damning critique of Peterson there. Basically a cult. His followers do not have any sense of independent critical thought, and they're actually enslaved to protecting him. It just doesn't make sense. You know, NCA, we want strong, self-sufficient, free-thinking Canadians. That's what we want. And that's why we do these presentations. We want to give you the facts, to give you the information so you and your family can make better decisions. But this is very concerning. I'm going to shift to the second slide here. And this is from a mind control professional expert on Peterson. It says, quote, "Pseudo personalities such as Peterson will not tolerate any criticism of the group or the leader." Pseudo personalities will not tolerate any criticism of the group or leader. And that's exactly what's going on. And it says Jordan Peterson's personal responsibility cult. That's how it's labeled. She says he has an attitude of superiority. And even when his supporters are presented with contradictions, unreasonableness, incongruences in what they say, do, they often argue to maintain their belief system intact. Critical thinking abilities have been repressed. And she said, and this is all about mind control, and it just so happens Jordan Peterson is a psychologist. We just did a video the last few days on neuro-linguistic programming and mind control. Take a look at that video. No doubt Peterson is implementing a lot of these techniques on the people who read his books and follow him. And I took the time to listen to him. You know, I've read all the classical philosophers. I've read all the classical literature. Basically, he's stealing from a bunch of different authors, trying to redefine everything in his terms. It's a bunch of nonsense as far as I'm concerned, but I'm going to go into the facts now. We're going to shift here. I'm going to shift to this UN document, because this is we're going to head into the UN now. This is called Resilient People, Resilient Planet, A Future Worth Choosing. This came out in 2012. It was a report of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on global sustainability. This high-level panel on global sustainability was formed in 2010. And guess what? Jordan Peterson was asked to be on the panel, and he helped produce the report. And I'm gonna show that right now. If we go down to page 92, right here. Right there. Under James Lawrence Balsillie, I'm going to get to that gentleman. There's Jordan Peterson, who worked on the report. This report laid the foundation for UN Agenda 2030, which the globalist conservatives under Stephen Harper signed in 2015. The current federal government is implementing Agenda 2030 now. That's why you're seeing the transformation of Canada. It's through that agenda and tied to Agenda 2021, which Mulroney signed Canada onto. This is all happening, and it's being implemented on all levels of government. And it should be pointed out in that report, if we go back to it, James Balsillie, this is an interesting figure. This gentleman is the right-hand man of George Soros, the globalist George Soros. Peterson worked under him to help produce this report. Balsillie founded the CIGI, Center for International Governance Innovation, and co-founded INET, Institute for New Economic Thinking, with George Soros. Balsillie was also the founder of Research in Motion, RIM, that created the BlackBerry. And just coincidentally, the federal government just handed out 40 million of our tax dollars to RIM. Unbelievable. But that's another issue there. And, you know, what's interesting here is that if you look at the video comments by Peterson, he claimed he was hired to edit this report, to edit out the ideological claptrap, quote, ideological claptrap. And he kind of just dismisses the report and his involvement. Well, I'm sorry. That we have critical thinking here at NCA. That's not good enough, Jordan Peterson. That's not good enough. And we looked at that report, and you're trying to, it's loaded with ideology. Loaded. The whole thing is ideology. And the ideology is globalism. Global world order. That ideology is rampant through that report. Do not kid yourself not. And he spent 2 years on there, and he claims he took the ideology out. That is completely, that's a lie. He's basically lying to his members and to the public. And I'll give you an example. There's massive wealth distribution in that in that report from developed countries to developing countries, and we see our federal government doing this. And there's talk about getting illegal migration into the country, and all the health benefits and services for them. This report is all about global communism, open borders, global citizenry. That's what it's about. And it should be noted factually, and it's important, it's not only what people say, it's what they don't say that almost matters as much. And Peterson never mentions UN Agenda 21, UN Agenda 2030, global world order, and he just dismisses his connection to this report. And I'll tell you this, the facts, you don't get on that high level panel without being a globalist. You're not on there unless you're part of their agenda. Let's mistake that. That's obvious. And he never talks about his connection to George Soros and Balsillie. So those are real red flags right there. And I've looked at the comments from people. They said he talks about global tyranny. But hey, global tyranny, that's a really abstract term there, Jordan Peterson. Can't you be a little more specific what you're referring to? It looks like he's afraid. He's afraid to talk about the globalist agenda. And why is he afraid, everyone? You think about it. I'm going to shift now. We're going to look at his views on nationalism and Euro-Canadians, white Canadians. And it should be noted that Canadian nationalism is the greatest obstacle to the globalist agenda that is being posed on the Canadian people. That is the greatest opposition. And Jordan Peterson, without question, is vehemently anti-Canadian nationalist, anti-Euro white Canadian. There's no doubt about that. That just ties into his globalist connection. Our message to Canadians is get your heads out of the false left-right, liberal conservative, controlled party doctrines. They're all about dividing and controlling. So I'm going to play a video clip here backing up this. I'm just going to adjust the audio briefly here.
This is more than a sofa. This is where you sink in, wind down, and kick back. This...
I think that the Caucasians, let's say, should revert to being white. I think that's a bad idea. It's a dangerous idea. And it's coming fast. And I don't like to see that.
And then that's celebrated, say, on the radical right. Say, well, okay, well, if we're going to devolve into tribalism, then we'll triumphantly herald our past accomplishments and unite under the flag of our race and blood. But we know what happens when that happens. It's not pretty.
There, you heard it right from Jordan Peterson's mouth. This guy is vehemently anti-Canadian nationalist, anti-Euro-Canadian, anti-white Canadian. It's ridiculous. And he's, I don't know why he's digressing the argument down to race and whiteness or color. It seems like it's in the low level of argumentation. And then he likes to say it's a dangerous idea. It's coming fast. And that's a bit of neuro-linguistic programming there that he's using. He's making a false equivalency of Canadian nationalism to fascism, Nazism. That is a false equivalization. That's what he's doing. And he's embedding the experience of the Holocaust in your brains to equate it to Canadian nationalism. This is mind control. This is called anchoring experience and ideas in your map of reality. And that's a very false, illogical argument he's making. These horrible Nazis, they were fascists. It was called fascism. Canadian nationalism is all about freedom, justice, patriotism, Canadian sovereignty, Canadian citizenry, equal opportunity, civil rights. Nothing wrong with those things. How are those dangerous? This is all mind control and a game these globalists play. And then he likes this term, descent into tribalism. And then he talks about herald our past accomplishment. He says they're unearned. Like, this is nonsense. And he wants Euro-Canadians, white Canadians to deny their race and blood. And he says it is not pretty. This is all mind control. And I'm going to get further into what he's doing. He's playing his mind game on young Canadians. He's trying to get them separate from their ethnic connections, their heritage, their identity, their cultural norms. He's trying to isolate them and control them. And that's what we're seeing. It's pretty bad stuff. And these are the anchor words of mind control that he was using in the subconscious. The word dangerous, race, white, that's a loaded word. Radical. Those are just anchor words that he's connecting to Caucasians. He's connecting it to Canadian nationalism. I'm going to go back up to the video. I'm just going to show you a couple other pieces of evidence that we got to look at. This is in Peterson's home. Can you believe it? That's in Peterson's home. That's a full-size portrait of that killer Lenin. Can you believe it? Full-size portrait. Right there. And I'm not going to judge someone for the art they have in their home, but this is quite telling. I'll tell you, I would never have a portrait of Lenin in my home, without question. This guy, just so you know about Lenin, he founded the Russian Communist Party. He was leader of the Bolshevik Revolution, an architect and first head of the Soviet state. He launched what's called Red Terror across Russia. It led to over 100,000 to 200,000 innocent people being murdered. And Lenin authorized the execution of the Tsar at that time and his family and extended family. They were gunned down in the middle of the night in a basement of a home. Over 15 women, children, kids. And so why does this guy have this guy in his home? That's a real red flag. It shows he must have some inclination to cultural Marxism, communism. It's pretty sickening. Because that Lenin was an absolute thug. He was the murder rampage that he put on across Russia was horrible. I'm going to shift to another image here that's in here. This is something I've referred to, but it's an important symbol. It's an octopus of this global communism and all their tentacles spreading around the world. And that's the best way to look at this global world order agenda, and I've referred to it in the past. All these little tentacles. The G7. The G20, the World Economic Forum, the UN, the World Government Summit, the controlled opposition in Ottawa, people like Jordan Peterson, UN agenda being implemented on all levels of government, UN organizations, nonprofits working in Canada to implement it, the globalist mainstream media, the financing behind the scene by these globalists. So the analogy of an octopus is very good. There's lots of tentacles. And we believe that this guy Peterson is simply part of that. He's playing a psychological game on young Canadians to try and suck any connection they have to their heritage, their cultural, their ethnicity, their identity. While the globalist transformation is going on, there'll be nothing left. I'm going to show one more image here. This image is pretty telling too. So this image is from it's actually from Sydney, Australia. The climate change, social change agenda. This was in 2008. But look at this, the symbol of communism, the fist, and they're using the same symbol for the climate change agenda. And it just shows there's an equivalency between the two. We know about the imposition of the carbon tax to finance the agenda and overrun Western countries with mass migration. I'm going to shift now. I'm going to look at his recent book and just share some commentary on it. It's called The 12 Rules of Life. And this really exposes this Peterson's agenda. And we believe what he's trying to do is isolate typically white male Canadians, put them in their individual bubbles while the transformation is coming, because these particular Canadians should be the ones who are standing up for our country that's under attack right now by these globalists and this global world order agenda. And I have a slide I'm going to bring up on this. Slide number 3. Basically, if you want to understand Peterson, he's doing a deliberate attack on ideology, and yet, contradictorily, he pushes his own ideology of sovereignty of individual and responsibility of individual. What he's trying to do, as I mentioned, is cut off the individual, typically white males, from their group connection, from the heritage, ethnicity, identity with Canada, also with any sense of patriotism, and that's what he's trying to do, isolate them. Let me go back to the slide. And Professor Deschênes out of University New Brunswick has talked about this. He called it, basically, this is global citizenry, where you're just cut off from your surroundings, you're floating, you're confused, and you don't stand for any patriotism, and you're highly subject to influence. Further, this is really twisted. The definition of ideology, according to Peterson, quote, a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis. That's actually the definition, but Peterson says ideologies are simple ideas disguised as science or philosophy that are unsatisfactory, simplest. This is a very, he said they're unsatisfactory, simplistic explanations for the complexity of existence. And I say absolute absurd. That is just a complete absurd. He's trying to redefine ideology. He's trying to attack ideology. He doesn't want people to stand for anything. Yet he's pushing his own ideology on Canadians. This is the definition of ideology: a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis for economic or political theory and policy. Yet Peterson is fooling his followers, saying ideologies are simple ideas. Okay, I challenge the followers out there. Is capitalism a simple idea? Is communism a simple idea? Is nationalism a simple idea? Is populism a simple idea? Come on. This is absolute nonsense he's peddling. And ideologies are critical. They lay a foundation for one's belief system. Yet he's trying to deny the ideology except the one he supports. This is absolute nonsense and mind control. And I'm going to shift down here. And Peterson chooses, quote, chooses to focus on individual responsibility. Some of the tenets he pushes: take responsibility for your own life. That's really interesting because all the stuff he's saying is about you, your, and nothing about group. Nothing about working together for the common good. And there's no mention of interconnectedness, the forces beyond one controls. And what Peterson doing is putting immense blame and burden unreasonably on the individual. He says, quote, the classic hero must give up something to be reborn and meet a great challenge. That is just nonsense. And we say, why give up if you're already a hero? This is just utter nonsense that's coming out of him. He says, acknowledge that life is suffering. Your goal is to make progress to avoid suffering. Well, basically what Peterson did there, he plagiarized from Buddhism. The main tenet of Buddhism, life is all suffering. Why doesn't he footnote Buddhism? Why doesn't he footnote? He just ripped it off from the Buddhist philosophy there. Unbelievable. And then he has some typical overprotective adults avoid discussing suffering with their children with the hope that it will protect them from it. So what? Obvious. Say something we know. And then he says, if we live properly, and this is really critical here, and this is according to Peterson, if we live properly according to Peterson, we would be resistant to the pains of existence and to the enticing lures of empty ideologies promising safety. A loaded statement. Some ideologies, some are not. Live how he commands. Control. This is all mind control by Peterson. He's saying, live according to me and you won't suffer. If you live according to ideologies other than his, you're going to be suffering. This is just mind control of Peterson and pushing his superiority on his followers. Rule 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back, but also speak your mind, put your desires forward, dare to be dangerous. It's funny he uses the word dangerous here. And this is all from the realm of his ideology of sovereignty, responsibility of the individual. Yet there's no connection to heritage, ethnicity, group identity, patriotism, which he views as dangerous. What Peterson's saying is all about the individual, a disconnected individual. Did you, like he says, quote, did you do everything within your power to improve, quote, your situation? Were, quote, you a passive compliance to your sabotage? And then he says here, what shall I do with a torn nation? Stitch it back together with careful words of truth. He speaks about our existence. Speak about our existence, not one-sided ideologies, so that we can find a common ground and proceed together. Again, he attacks ideologies. He attacks the notion as working together. This one's interesting. He says, what shall I do with the stranger? Invite him into my house. Treat him like a brother so that he may become one. And you could argue that's a prelude to open borders. He's saying invite strangers into your house, become one with them. So if we're doing that in our house, we should do it at our borders. Just invite them all in and become one with them. And then he goes, this is a quote from him. It's pretty interesting. Part of the core information that I've been purveying is that identity politics is a sick game. You don't play racial, ethnic, gender identity games. The left plays them on behalf of the press, let's say, and the right tends to play them on behalf of nationalism and ethnic pride. I think they're equally dangerous. So if we dissect what he said there with a critical mind, he's playing the false left-right paradigm, the decisive game between left and right. He's also making a false equivalency of identity politics with nationalism and so-called ethnic pride. So this is a very loaded statement full of bias. And now I'm going to turn to the conclusion here. And this is the fundamental thing missing from the ideology of Peterson, which is the ideology is comprised of statements taken from other Buddhism, Christianity, literature, and so on. He's just basically stolen stuff, put it together, redefined things into what's called sovereignty of individual responsibility vis-a-vis global citizen. And this is what's missing. And it's very significant. He says, put your, again, emphasize on your house in order. But what's missing is there's no stand on guard for your people, your country. That's missing. There's no mention of Canadianism, protection of homeland, integration, importance of ethnicity, heritage, cultural norms. There's no sense of nationalism, patriotism, and Peterson's sermons. It's all about the individual, isolated, cut off. And here's a sample of what Peterson lacks. Quote, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. John Kennedy, U.S. President. And from our anthem, True Patriot Love, Thomas Jefferson, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And Thomas Paine, patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. So please think over the information shared tonight. Peterson is playing a mind game, neuro-linguistic programming, mind control on people who follow him. It's all about burdening and isolating the individual, disconnecting them from their country, from their people, from their ethnicity, from their heritage, from their identity, while this globalist agenda is going on. We view him as a psychological arm of the globalist agenda. Look at the facts. But this is utter nonsense. It's full of contradictions. As I mentioned at the beginning, a mind control expert said he's a cult leader. And then we have a professor of philosophy that basically said the same thing. So do your homework, but don't get fooled by people like Peterson. Remember, he worked for the UN. He worked for George Soros' right-hand man, and he helped write the white paper for UN Agenda 2030. Everything I see and what he's saying corresponds to global citizen. And as I mentioned, the main threat, the only threat to this globalist agenda is an upsurge of nationalism. the beauty of nationalism, in our context, Canadian nationalism. That can defeat this sinister global world order agenda that's being imposed on us. I hope you found this information interesting. Please share it, and I want to wish you a good night. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to reading your comments. Please have a critical mind. Please have a critical mind. That's the only way forward. Think for yourself. Thank you very much.